Good day, everyone. My name is Ms. Palisa Ramabodu, and welcome to another session with me on the IBP studios. So today I am going to be doing skeletons as we are preparing for term 2. The term 2 topics, but I'm going to go back a little, make a revision on the essay topics that we have dealt with. The first topic that I'm going to unpack is the Vietnam essay. I am also going to do the Black Power Movement essay. And lastly, I am also going to zoom into the essay of term 2, which is the Black Power Movement. Now, we understand that the structures have changed. We are doing the essays Vietnam, Congo for paper 1 and Black Power, and then for paper 2 we are doing Black Power as an essay, we're doing the Road to Democracy as an essay, and we're also doing the Collapse of Communism as essays. So it is up to you whether you're going to go for the 2 essays and 1 source-based, or you're going to go for the 2 source-based and 1 essay. But my advice to you is that you go for the 2 essays and the 1 source-based. Right, so I'll start with the Vietnam, the topic for Vietnam. And I am just going to unpack or uncover the skeleton, the timeline and skeleton. And I'll stop and explain here and there. First of all, we need to understand the timeline for the topic. Vietnam started in 1946, and with the first war in Vietnam that began, which was France's attempt to reassert its imperial control over Vietnam. We also need to go back and understand that during World War II, before World War II, France had colonized Vietnam, and it was under it, but by World War II, France had to pull back to go fight into the war. And then the Vietnam was under attack by Japan, but after World War II, Japan had to withdraw out of Vietnam, and France went back to reassert its power. The Vietnamese nationalists led by Ho Chi Minh, the war there from 1946, led by Ho Chi Minh, the establishment of the Viet Minh, and how powerful and successful the war was on the side of the Vietnamese, that led to the fall and collapse of France's colonial power in Vietnam. And then we move right to 1954, because the war lasted for like 9 years. And then from 1954, the end of the First Vietnam War, and which led to temporarily dividing the country at the 17th parallel into 2 divisions, the North and the South. Now, this happened at the Geneva Conference of 1954, when the issues of Japan were to be discussed. We understand that North Vietnam was controlled by Ho Chi Minh and the communist supporters, and South Vietnam was controlled by Ngo Dinh Diem. I don't know how to pronounce this. It's Ngo Dinh Diem. Ngo Dinh Diem. I just pronounce it with Afrikaans. I don't know if I'm doing it correctly, but my colleagues will correct me next time we meet up. Which was supported by the United States, and it was also supported by democratic supporters. Now, this conference shaped Vietnam into something that was known as battle, proxy war, a battleground for Cold War, because we also need to get into the understanding and realization of World War III, just after World War II, which is known as Cold War. So countries where there were division in terms of capitalism and communism automatically invited these superpowers into their countries. And with North Vietnam and South Vietnam, the same thing happened. So let's look at the first stage of the war. The war is divided into 4 stages, and these stages are very important. I believe you cannot skip even 1 stage, or you cannot skip any of these information that are written in the stages. Maybe your teacher has taught you with a different structure, but you will see as I point out these bullets, every single bullet is something that you are familiar with. It's something that your teacher has touched on. Right. Now, from 1955 to 1960, we've got stage one, which is when United States began its advisory role in Vietnam. They sent thousands of U.S. military advisors, and the main thing was to go and train the Vietnamese army, the South Vietnamese armies, and the Viet Cong guerrilla attacks began in the south. Now, from 1955 to 1960, stage one, you need to know that the U.S. military troops were sent to Vietnam. You also need to understand the establishment of Viet Cong, because Viet Cong was established in South Vietnam. And you also need to understand their guerrilla attacks, who inspired them, where were they getting their supply, and which ideology were they following. Viet Cong, it was Vietnamese communist, and obviously it derives from the NLF. National Liberation Front, that was against South Vietnam government, and they started staging these guerrilla warfare attacks. Now, stage two is between 1961 and 1964, and here the United States begins its counterinsurgency role in Vietnam. Now, what does this mean? The Green Berets were sent, and secret military operation began. And from November the 1st, 1963, Diem was assassinated. Diem was assassinated in the United States supporters' military coup. And after he was assassinated, a similar government regime was placed that was corrupt, that was oppressive. Dictators, they were still set onto power. November 22, 1963, JFK was assassinated, and then August 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin, very also important. And then from the third stage of the war dates back to 1965 to 1968, and this is where the United States begins its combat role in Vietnam. I want you to look at from stage one. Stage one says U.S. begins its advisory role. Stage 2, U.S. begins its counterinsurgency role. Stage 3, U.S. begins its combat role in Vietnam. And then stage 4, I'll just get to it now. Now, when the combat role began in Vietnam, the first official combat troops arrived, leading to dramatic escalation of the war. Now, this is when the war started escalating and becoming very, very, very bloody. And then in January the 30th, 1968, the Tet Offensive occurred. That we know that many people were killed. It was a bloody situation, a war that was led, and so many people dying. And then March the 16th, we also know that 1968, the My Lai massacre led to the killing of many people. And then the fourth stage of this war is known as Vietnamization. This is when the U.S. troops' strength started decreasing slowly. They were starting to be withdrawn one by one, and bombing raids stepped up secretly between Cambodia and Laos. And then there were also high participation of anti-war protests in Woodstock and in Kent State. Now, your essay does not necessarily have to take up this structure. These are just the key pointers that is expected in your essay, and I took up a different structure, especially with timelines, because I wanted you to focus and to understand that the timeline from 1946 to 1975, everything needs to be jotted down in your essay. And this was also serving as a reminder as to what is the United States' role in the Vietnam War, because you might get a question that will say, to what extent were the United States of America's strategies and tactics successful in the Vietnam War? Or you might get a question that will also say, how come did a small country like Vietnam defeat the mighty and powerful United States? And given the role that the United States played in Vietnam, they came guns blazing. They supported. They did everything in their power to make their power felt, but it was a dismal failure. Eventually, by 1975, U.S. troops have been withdrawn, and the world was tired with the United States. So I am done with the first part of my presentation. I'm just quickly going to take a 30 seconds break, and I'm going to roll on to the Black Power movement. which is our essay. So I will see you in a bit. Hi, welcome back. So the second edition of our presentation will deal with the Black Power movement, which falls under the topic civil society protest from 1950 to 1970s. Now, Black Power movement is your essay, and as it is the essay, we need to understand the exam guidelines that have been given unto us, which includes this structure. Like I said, I'm using the structure to unpack the different expectations from the exam committee or from everyone else with regards to you writing your exam. So we understand that the case study is Black Power and the examination guidelines for 2021, not 2020. Now, this section will deal with the reasons for the movement, very, very important. Black Panther Party, the roles of Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X, and lastly, the short-term and the long-term gains. Now, the key features of this, Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael, these are the leaders of Black Power movement. It's very important to know the difference. And Bobby Seale and Huey Newton were the leaders of Black Panther Party. Now, irrespective of what question you are going to get, you need to stress both of these movements leaders. Leadership is very important. You emphasize the role that Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael played, and you also emphasize and exaggerate the role that Bobby Seale and Huey Newton has played in the Black Panther Party. Now, with the introduction, the Black Power movement grew out of the dissatisfaction with the achievements of the civil rights movement in the second half of 1960. Guys, very important that you stress that the Black Power movement was formed just after the from people being dissatisfied with the civil rights movement. And that why were they dissatisfied? They were dissatisfied with the pace of the civil rights movement. They were dissatisfied with integration, racial integration in the movement, and they were also dissatisfied with the lives that Black African Americans were leading. And then as we unpack within the introduction and background, it's very important that we understand the definition of Black Power movement or Black Power, which is known as it is a philosophy, it is an ideology, it is a slogan, a call for Blacks to unite or for Blacks to understand themselves as Africans, or it is a philosophy that advocates Black pride and values. Now, I've mentioned a few things that the civil rights movement failed to achieve the main things. In as much as it achieved the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, they failed within the economic situations that African Americans did not reach. And then the majority of Black people living in the ghettos, attending under-resourced schools and living below government's poverty level. And then living like being unemployed, and those who were employed being paid very low wages, like police providing very little protection. In fact, they were guilty of the brutality that were caused towards the blacks. And then blacks were still subjected to so much discrimination. And sometimes they were like subjected to open racial abuse. And most African Americans were just living and attending inadequate schools, under-resourced schools. Public transport was inadequate. Hospital facilities were under-resourced. And it was just very difficult for blacks. Well, to cover your background, it is very important that you understand and you cover the reasons why the Black Power movement emerged. And then one other important thing that you need to stress out is the fact that why Carmichael moved out of the civil rights movement into the Black Power movement. It was after 1966 in June, after the James Meredith's death, and Stokely Carmichael, leader of the SNCC in the civil rights movement, felt that, it is enough. Black people needs black power. Now, with black power, we look at Malcolm X, who was the leader of Nation of Islam. If it's possible, you need to go and learn about the Nation of Islam, which was an African nationalist movement that advocated for black power, that advocated for black rights and civil rights. And then those who supported black power believed in self-pride, self-esteem. The slogan "Black is Beautiful" was coined, and "Black is Beautiful" was sang. It was promoted. Black people started to get rid of inferiority and low self-esteem, and they started embodying the slogan of "Black is Beautiful." They left black bleaching of their skin, and they also left the straightening of their hair, and they started embracing their Africanness with their afros. And then the promotion of black interest, black self-help program, self-defense against racial oppression, and more especially with the idea of police brutality. The fostering of a distinctive black culture, a self-sufficient black economy. This is what Black Power advocated. These are the things that Black Power advocated. And then with the Black Panther Party, we know, like I said, it was formed by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale in Oakland, and its aim was to protect black people from police brutality. And the Black Panthers were revolutionary socialists, and they drew up their 10 points program that emphasized self-black help programs that will alleviate poverty and promote a platform where black people can be empowered by themselves, for themselves. Right, I'm just going to quote a few pointers from the 10 points program. We have point 3, which called for the reparations or the compensation for slavery. Point 6, that called for black men to be exempt from military services. We also got point 7, which called for black people to form their armed groups for self-defense against police brutality, and this also made black people carry guns. And then point 8, it called for the release of all imprisoned blacks, full employment, and an end to capitalism, because we understand capitalism meant that the white capitalist kept becoming richer while blacks were becoming poorer. And then decent housing and sound education for all African Americans. These were some of the aims that Black Panther Party was promoting. Now I am going to zoom into Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X's roles. They were the leading opponents or exponents of the Black Power movement. Stokely Carmichael initially paid allegiance to the non-violent movement led by Martin Luther King. Very important. You need to stress that, first of all, he was part of the non-violent movement led by Martin Luther King, which was known as the Civil Rights Movement. He changed his ideas after the attack of James Meredith in 1966. He was shot and wounded in Mississippi. Stokely Carmichael urged Africans to take pride in being black. So between Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael adopted the slogan, "Black is Beautiful," which promoted black pride and rejected the notion of white style and fashion. He's the one that had said blacks must start embracing their culture, they must start embracing their natural hair, they must also start embracing their cultural clothes, African symbols and signs, African literature, African cultural styles and cultural fashion. He was in favor of African dress, like I'm saying, Afro hairstyles. He wanted African Americans to recognize their heritage, to recognize their Africanness, where they come from, their literature, their history, and he joined the BPP and promoted Black Power through his writings. So he was a powerful writer. He made a call for Black people to unite and recognize their heritage. So he was more focused on heritage and self-image of Africans. He made a call for Black people to define their goals and lead their own organizations. He encouraged Black people to build a sense of community. As you are reading this, you are able to draw up or to make your own line of argument, because remember, as I've mentioned before, we've got 4 principles of Black Power. We've got pride, we've got unity, we've got solidarity, we've got self-reliance, and lastly, we also have self-defense. So as you are reading these principles, pride, unity, solidarity, self-reliance, and self-defense, you are able to pick it up from the paragraph that we've written. So side notes, additional notes to your essay. As for instance, if you say, he wanted Black people to unite and recognize their own heritage. Which principle is this including? It is including self-reliance, it is including unity and solidarity. So in each paragraph, in each point or paragraph that you are going to write, as you jot down your own line of argument, of course, which is in line with the key question, it is also important to make your own line of argument or to make your own side notes as to, for instance, this is to show that self-reliance was being advocated, this is to show that Black pride was being advocated within the movement by saying Black is beautiful. So I wanted to stress that. I am also going to stress on Malcolm X, who was one of the leading figures of Black Power movement. We know that he was under the Nation of Islam, and Malcolm X believed that the white societies were deliberately preventing African Americans from empowering. Here it is. He says that the white societies were preventing African Americans from empowering themselves. He believed that there could be no integration between Blacks and white Americans. And according to him, separation of Black and white was necessary so that Blacks no longer depended on whites. After his pilgrimage to Mecca, that's when things started to change. That's when he believed that not all Blacks, not all whites are racist, and you know what, that had caused a lot of hatred and confusion within the movement, and it also led to his assassination in 1965 by his fellow Black nationalists. So now the gains of the Black Power movement, there were so many gains, there were some achievements. The confrontation approach of the Black Power movement led to the outbreak violence. It also, in America, this led to change and reform. The riots in Los Angeles in 1965 led to 34 deaths and 400 arrests. There was also widespread destruction of poverty, riots in the inner city, and in response to the violence, President Johnson appointed a commission in 1968 to investigate the cause of the riots, and the commission found that unemployment, poor housing, inadequate schools, and police brutality created hopelessness and frustration in African Americans. Now, meaning these riots that had taken place, that are mentioned in this paragraph here, had led to President Johnson wanting to investigate what are the cause of the riots, and as they had found that Black people were very frustrated and hopeless because of poverty, unemployment, poor housing, inadequate schools, and facilities, the commission was hired, and the commission was set. The commission warned that America might turn into 2 societies, one Black and the other white, separate but unequal unless the situation was addressed. This also led that President Johnson brought reforms that were aimed at eradicating poverty and discrimination, meaning through the influence of Black power, through the influence of Black Black Panther, changes started to be addressed by the American president, which is President Johnson, by appointing a commission to investigate and also addressing these inequalities, because they are going back to what? The community that is separate and unequal that we understand through the civil rights movement. It was a community that was promoted mostly by the supremacists, the white supremacists. Now, President Johnson, he came up with these reforms, and he definitely targeted the eradication of poverty and discrimination. And then the African Americans also started, which is the biggest advantage and the biggest gains, they also started to take pride in their African heritage, meaning they started to embody what? Pride. The word pride is highly emphasized. They started to wearing their Afro hairstyles, embracing their Africanness in their hair. They began to demand the creation of Black study programs in universities where students will be educated on Black history and Black nationalism. Black Power movement held conferences to encourage Black people to participate in public affairs. As a result, Black mayors were elected in several cities. They established programs to improve housing. Their movement also encouraged Black people, Black businesses and entrepreneurs as so to promote economic and social equality. The government banned segregation and discrimination in all workplaces and public facilities in 1964. And in 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed. No one could be prevented from voting according to the color of their skin. Now, these are the gains. Your essay, as I've said, embodies the reasons. Very important. The reasons go hand in hand with the aims. Your essay embodies the movement on its own, what Black Power is, what is the movement all about. It embodies the Black Panther movement, the Black Panther Party. We know that Black Power is a movement and Black Panther was a party under the movement. The Black Panther Party, including the leadership of Black Panther. Essay also needs to include the role that Stokely Carmichael played, as well as Malcolm X, and then lastly, the short-term and the long-term gains. I hope this was very helpful. I am going to take a small Anyana break, and then just for 30 seconds, just to clear my throat, come back, and we're going to move on. Thank you. Welcome back. Before we went to the ad break, I had unpacked the Black Power movement with the Black Panther Party, but now I have a small activity that I would like to pose for you. Now, because Black Power is an essay, we always struggle, not always struggle, but there's a bit of a challenge when it comes to responding to the essay questions. Why? Because the essay questions require you to take a stance. It requires you to respond to why you took the stance. It requires you to give us the hypothesis of your essay, what your essay is going to entail, and lastly, to tell us that what are some of the things that your essay is going to be discussed inside your introduction. Now, here is a question that I'm going to be giving to you. We have Black Power movement emerged as a radical form of protest amongst African Americans in the United States in 1965. Do you agree with the statement? Do you agree with the statement? Support your line of argument with relevant evidence. Now, it's more like a pretest. Pretest, write the introduction linked with the question above. Your introduction should not be longer than 8 lines. It shouldn't be longer than 8 lines. And then you need to take a stance, contextualize your question, when, where, who, what, and briefly outline their line of argument. You need to outline your line of argument because your line of argument is going to be used inside your essay, inside the body, inside your content and your structure. And for post, we want you to write, I'm expecting your teacher to expect you to write the post test, which is the writing the conclusion linked to the above question. Now, I am going to give you a sample of the introduction. Remember, they had asked you, do you agree with the statement? Question is, what is the statement? The statement is Black Power movement emerged as a radical form of protest. Now, you need to understand the word radical form of protest. Militant, radical, violent form of protest amongst African Americans in the United States. Meaning, inside your essay, you will need to emphasize why the Black Power and Black Panther leaders felt it was important to form this movement and the parties that were within the movement. Now, in your introduction, taking a stance, of course, it will be, I agree with the statement that Black Panther movement emerged as a radical form of protest amongst African Americans in the United States after 1965. That's your beginning statement. Why do you believe that? Because Black people because they're speaking about radicalism, they're speaking about militancy, they're speaking about violence, meaning it is advocating the principle of self-defense. In other words, you will say, I agree with the statement above that Black Power movement emerged as a radical form of protest amongst the African Americans in the United States of America after 1965 because Black people were experiencing high levels of police brutality. You can also claim, you can also write a bit of like 2 lines, two facts or in terms of what made them form these protests. And then as you are within your introduction, you will claim that this essay will provide relevant evidence to back up my argument. You don't have to say my argument, but you can say this essay will include a discussion. This essay will include an elaboration. Elaboration of what? The argument based with relevant evidence. What is the relevant evidence? The relevant evidence, as I had mentioned earlier, meaning you can say this essay will include a discussion on the reasons for the movement, the Black Panther Party, the role or the leadership role, the short-term and the long-term gains. So this is your introduction. That's how strong your introduction should be, because as markers will read your essay, they begin with your introduction, and it needs to be so convincing. It needs to be very, very strong and alerting that you have made preparations. And within your essay, within the body, your line of argument needs to go back to what? That indeed the Black Power movement as well as the Black Panther Party, it was formed because of what the African Americans were going through. You can also say that it was indeed formed in order for black people to state their radicalism, to state their militancy, to claim to back themselves up as a form of self-defense strategies and tactics. And then for your post, I had said you write a linked conclusion to the question. Now, a linked conclusion, you can give ideas such as in conclusion, in summary, to conclude, conclusively, or in conclusion. The emergence of the Black Power movement emerged as a form of radical. It emerged as a radical form of protest amongst African Americans in the United States after 1965. So in your conclusion, it is a summary of what your introduction, your stance, the stance that you have taken in your introduction. Your conclusion just summarized everything that you have written in your introduction as well as your body. Now, one last essay that I'm going to tackle. It is the skeleton of the Black consciousness topic of paper 2, which falls under civil resistance in South Africa from 1970s to the 1980s. Now, this topic right here, if you have done Black Power movement, then definitely you will understand the influence of Black Power movement led to the formation of Black consciousness movement in South Africa. Now, this philosophy of Black consciousness helped South Africans to stand up against the apartheid government. What impact did the philosophy of Black consciousness have as a great success on South Africans in the 1970s to the 1980s to challenge apartheid? This is what I want us to focus on. The impact of the philosophy on its own, the successes of the philosophy, and how did it challenge the apartheid system. That is more like a structure. Content focus. When you prepare for the essay, these are the things that need to be in the content of your essay. The nature and the aims of Black consciousness. What is Black consciousness? Did it entail? Where does it come from? Who inspired Black consciousness? Who inspired Steve Biko? The role of Steve Biko. Who is Steve Biko? What was his plan? Which movement does he derive from? And what were his aims in terms of the movement that he formed under Black consciousness? And we know that this movement that was formed by him was SASO. So you will also need to give like a brief description of SASO, what it entailed and what it was all about. And then the third bullet here, it covers Black consciousness movement, BCM, and the challenges posed by the ideas of Black consciousness to the government of apartheid. And then the 1976 Soweto uprising. You will also need to briefly discuss relating to the influence of Black consciousness on the students and how they became fed up to a point that they organized the Soweto uprising. And then lastly, you will need to look at the Black consciousness on South African politics, meaning the legacy that Steve Biko left in the politics of South Africa. Right, so this is more like a repetition under here, that the question focus of the crisis of apartheid. We see question focus is the challenge of Black consciousness to the apartheid states, the nature and the aims, as I've discussed above, the role that Steve Biko played, the movement on its own, SASO, and how it influenced the learners to form the Soweto uprising and to challenge the apartheid states, and what were the repercussions of the Soweto uprising, and lastly, the legacy that Black consciousness left for South Africans within the politics spheres, educational spheres, and the everyday lifestyle of Africans in South Africa. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that these presentations were a bit helpful and that they are going to shape and structure you into the right direction with regards to preparations for the exams. I am looking forward to other preparations. I am looking for other presentations. And yes, I hope that you study and you keep strict with your books. Thank you so much.